In this video, we're going to cover the basics of creating a project in Unity, as well as the interface. We won't go into every feature of the interface, just enough to get you started. Go ahead and start Unity Hub. Next to the New button is a drop-down. Select it and choose your 2019.4 long-term support version. The window that appears lets us choose a project or a folder name here, the location of the project here, and a project type on the left side. The type is a fast way to get Unity to bootstrap or set up our project according to what type of real-time environment we wish to create. In this course, we only care about creating a 3D project. Make sure in your submissions that you stay away from the 2D, the high-definition rendering pipeline, or the universal rendering pipeline. Unity uses a folder hierarchy to organize project information. The name of the project will be the name of the root folder it creates, so be descriptive. For homework assignments or in-class lectures, name it the homework number or the lecture number. Right now, I'll go ahead and call this Week 1 _ Unity Basics. You can use a space if you want to. Choose a location that's easy for you to find. You're going to need to zip several of your projects up and send them to me as homework assignments. Press the ... and choose a location to create the project folder. I'm going to hit Select Folder. Then I'm going to press the blue Create button. Unity is going to launch a splash screen and a dialog box that displays Unity's progress in setting up your project. Now, as a side note, if you happen to be using Dropbox or Google Backup and Sync, also called Google Drive, or some other system, I recommend you pause any real-time syncing you might have going on if your Unity project is on that drive. The reason is because Unity is going to be manipulating and editing files in real time, and usually faster than Google Sync or anything else can keep up with. This can cause conflicts in drives and all sorts of issues. So it's always a good idea to pause those systems until after your project is completed. Before we even look at the interface, I want you to get a better understanding of your project folder and how a Unity project is structured. Using a file explorer, go to the directory where you created your project. Or if for some reason you don't remember where it is, you can always right-click in this window at the bottom called Project. Then you can scroll up to the top and choose Show in Explorer. Explorer will open up directly where your project is located. A Unity project is a series of carefully organized and named folders. Do not mess with the project folder, and do not change the names of things in the project folder unless you know what you are doing. The first folder is called Assets. It's also called Source Assets, and this is where you'll be working 99% of the time. It is where you will place your models, textures, scripts, and scenes that you create. However, understand that there is a reason I made the distinction of source assets. These are the original source files you will create along with metadata that Unity generates about each of those files. The metadata stores the specific settings you select for the file and determines how it is interpreted and digested or modified by the engine. On the other side of the source assets is the artifact database, which is located in the folder below that called Library. The library folder contains many things, but what I want to focus on for the moment is the artifact database. The asset folder holds your original assets, things you created maybe in third-party programs. But the artifact database stores the results of importing those generated assets, converted into a format based on what you are developing for and what Unity uses internally. Unity can take in many file types and formats, but that doesn't mean they are in a format that is optimal or even contains the correct information for a real-time application. Now, there are many other folders and many other uses, but for now, that's all we're going to cover. You just need to understand that a Unity project is a series of folders with specific names that are used to organize your entire project, and that you will be primarily working within the Assets folder. Let's jump back into Unity. Now, my interface usually will never look like the default interface that you have on your screen. It will look something like this and have many different windows, some of which we're not even going to cover today. So let's all get on the same page and make sure that all of our interfaces are the same for this basic tutorial. What I would like you to do is go up to the right-hand side of the screen at the top and choose this dropdown. Go and select Default. Now we all have the same layout, and we can each go through these different parts of the menu to understand how they work. At the far left top are our menus, the typical ones you see in many different programs such as File and Edit, although several others that are more Unity specific. We'll dive into them in future lessons. Below that is the toolbar, with icons to control the camera or how you rotate and manipulate different elements, as well as the pivot points and even snapping to the grid. In the center of the screen are your icons to play, pause, stop, or even step through your game step by step. And on the far right are icons to set up collaboration if you're working with others in a team, look for different services that you might employ within your project, what account you happen to be signed in through, your layers, and then finally, the workspace that you have decided to use. Smack dab in the center and taking up the most real estate is your scene view, which you can think of as an editor-only view that allows you to move, add, select, and manipulate objects. This view is not the game view, and the controls you use here to manipulate things are not going to show up in your final game. It is up to you to program your own movement controls or use controls someone else has created. Now, behind the Scene tab is the Game tab. This shows you the view from your game's currently active camera. Now, when you have the Scene view and Game view stacked like this, where only one of them is visible, if you were to press the play button, the Game view will automatically replace the Scene view. However, if you were to split these into two separate windows, the Scene view and the Game view will not overlap. More on this later. Now, one thing many beginners mess up is that the game view requires your focus to intercept keyboard and mouse commands. That is, it needs to be selected or active. As you can see here, as I move from tab to tab, that tab becomes a lighter shade of gray and also features a blue bar along the top. When working with your games, make sure you have the game view selected. Finally, there's the Asset Store. The Asset Store is a central repository where you can download free or paid assets, and you can even create your own and submit them. However, in this course, we will not be using the Asset Store. You'll be creating all of your content from the ground up. Therefore, go ahead and right-click on the Asset Store and hit Close. Taking up a tremendous amount of space here at the bottom is the Project view, as well as the Console view. The project view shows all the folders and files that are inside your assets folder in your Unity project, which we saw earlier. Now on the far right of this bar are a series of 3 dots. This allows you to switch the layout of your project folder. Some people prefer a single column layout, where you can nest different objects in one central location. However, I typically prefer the 2-column layout at times, which separates the folders from the individual files you see over here. Below the Project tab is a plus icon, which allows you to create various things, as we'll call them for now. We'll discuss what those things are in the future. You can also right-click in any of the open areas and go to Create and get that exact same list here. To the left is the search bar. Now, we don't have much in our scene right now, so there's not much searching to be done. But as your projects rapidly expand in size, this is going to become a very important feature. You can search by name, by type, by label, or even by favorites. Now on the far left, we have our favorites and a few predefined ways of searching that are really good when you have a larger project. Very often you'll just want to see materials, models, or other things, and we'll discuss what those are in the future when we have something in our scene. For now though, we're going to click on this drop down and minimize that to get more space in our project folder. Below that is the Assets folder. The same Assets folder we saw when we went into the File Explorer and looked inside of our project. The only difference between this view and the view in the File Explorer is that the metadata is not being shown. Since this is metadata, you almost have no reason to directly modify it unless things go wrong and you need to delete it for some reason. Unity has gone ahead and provided us with one folder called Scenes, where the current scene is already saved. As we can see here, we click on Scenes, and here is our sample scene. Below this folder is another one called Packages. Packages allow Unity to compartmentalize features so that they can be removed if you don't require them, or updated separately from the rest of Unity. We'll go more into packages and the package manager at another time. Now on the bottom, it of course lists the current path of where you are located, And to the far right is a very nice and very overlooked slider. This slider is going to change the size of the icons shown on the screen. If you click and drag this all the way to the left, it will reduce them down to a simple, almost detailed file list like you would see in Explorer. This is my preferred way of looking at my scene information. The icon displays information on what kind of object it is, and you get to see the entire full name. And if you use a proper naming convention, makes organization very easy. Behind the Project tab is the Console tab. This is where Unity outputs debug, warning, or error information. Along the top are toggles for controlling what's displayed or when it's displayed. We'll go more into this when we start coding and producing actual output. Needless to say, this is a great window to have open somewhere, but we really don't need it taking up so much real estate space. Now on the far right is the Inspector tab, and over here on the side is a little lock button to lock whatever it is you're currently inspecting, so that as you manipulate and select different objects, what the inspector shows doesn't change with it. Next to that are 3 little dots displaying different settings. There are 2 modes to the inspector. Just file it in the back of your head that there's a normal and a debug mode for the inspector, and both are going to show you different kinds of information in different ways. Now, the information displayed in the inspector changes based on what you have selected. You'll almost always have this window open so you can see important information about an object's location and any components that are attached that control its behavior. At the moment, the inspector is blank because we don't have anything selected. If we move over to the left-hand side of the screen, we'll see what's called the hierarchy. Now, if it's been collapsed, go ahead and click this arrow on your sample scene and click one of these objects, and you'll see the inspector come to life. Go ahead and click on the directional light and notice that the inspector, while similar, isn't quite the same. Each of these show different kinds of information, which we'll cover in the next lecture. Now at the far bottom is information about light baking. Light baking is where we try to reduce the calculations required when making a scene look pretty with realistic lighting by storing that information away for later use as some sort of a cached file. This information can take hours, if not days, to generate in some worst-case scenarios, depending upon the quality you select. Therefore, doing all that calculating now means the computer doesn't have to do it later. Now, if you notice anything start to bake and it doesn't say auto-generating lighting off, I highly recommend disabling light baking. Go to Window and then Rendering and Light Settings. This will bring up a new window, which we will get to in a future lecture on lighting. What's important is to go to the bottom and make sure that Auto Generate is not enabled. Now, there are many more menus than this in Unity, and in one of the lectures, we're actually going to discuss how you can create your own. If we go over to the Windows tab over here, you can see quite a few not visible by default. We will cover these menus in future lectures. Now, one window I really haven't gone into is the hierarchy menu. And that's because we haven't really talked about what these things are within the hierarchy. This will be in the follow-up video where we'll break these down and get a better understanding of what's here. All you need to know for the moment is that these are all the objects in your current scene. Before we end this video, I'm going to load a large project and show you what to expect your project to look like as you learn and develop in this course, and why it's incredibly important for you to learn good organizational skills now. This is a current project that a team on Rowan has been working on for the last year. And with thousands of assets, organization is incredibly important to keep this from becoming a nightmare. With so many assets in play, what you're going to notice is that loading the project up is actually taking a good bit of time. Now, there's a lot going on in this scene, but let's just focus on one area, and that's down here in the project folder. What you can see are multiple folders with subfolders underneath of them. The reason for this is because there are thousands of models and assets within this project, and every asset is clearly named and labeled so that we can, for instance, do a search, such as door. And here I can find all the assets that are common to a door if I needed to place one within my scene. In addition, we could search by type. I could click here and say, I want to find all of my models, or textures, or all of my scenes in one location. It's incredibly important that when you work with a team, that everyone has the same convention so that we can all find our assets even when we don't create them ourselves. Now you'll notice that my interface has changed from the default interface we saw before. And that's because I find that the standard interface is just not fast enough. That is, the elements that I repeatedly use are too far away from one another. Let's go ahead and change this back to the default workspace. So what I'm going to do is show you how to manipulate the windows so that you can make an interface that works for you. Don't worry too much about making it look like my interface. What works for me may not work for you. Now the first thing is that we have the hierarchy over here and we have the inspector over here. As I mentioned before, as we make selections in our hierarchy, we're going to notice that our inspector over here also updates. I personally like the hierarchy and the inspector right next to each other. So I'm going to click and drag this tab and you'll notice it starts to float. I'm going to drag it over to where I want it to be. I'm going to choose right here on the side so it takes up this entire space. The next thing I'm going to do is move my project over here to the side underneath my hierarchy. Why? Well, because many times I will be dragging and dropping objects from my project into my scene or into my inspector. Keeping them all close by one another means my mouse doesn't need to move very far. In addition, I'm going to click down here and move this all the way to the left so that I get a nice ordered list of all the different objects that I'm working with. Doing this conserves space, and since I'm using a pretty good naming convention, I know exactly what I'm working with at all times. Now, another thing I mentioned is that the console really doesn't need to be this huge. So go ahead, click the console, and I'm going to drag that over here on the bottom of the inspector. Very rarely do I need an inspector that takes up the entire length of everything, and I can usually move this console to be pretty small over here. Now with this setup, I have an enormous window over here that allows me to see my screen completely and manipulate and select different objects, while also keeping all these other parts of my menu together. Now if you would like to save your workspace, simply click up here at the top right corner and go to Save Layout. Go ahead and give it an interesting name. I usually use my name followed by how I'm going to be using this layout, such as George Assembly. And click Save. Now, if you made a mistake, you can always delete layouts as well, or revert everything back to the factory settings if things really break. This can happen when you're creating your own classes or extending the interfaces inside of Unity. In the next lesson, we're going to discuss navigating within Unity, creating basic objects, and inspecting them.